I never imagined that taking a job as a private nurse would change my life forever. For 2 years, I cared for Mr. Harold Winters, a 92-year-old reclusive millionaire who lived in a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of Boston. The pay was excellent, far better than what I made at the hospital, but the job came with one significant challenge: complete isolation. Mr. Winters had no visitors, no family called, no friends stopped by. His only connection to the outside world was through his attorney, Mr. Donovan, who visited once a month to handle business matters. He wasn't always this way, Mr. Donovan told me during my first week. Harold was once quite social, a prominent figure in Boston's elite circles, but after his sister disappeared in 1973, something in him changed. He withdrew from society entirely. I nodded politely, not thinking much of it at the time. My job was to administer medication, monitor vital signs, prepare meals, and provide companionship to a lonely old man, not to unravel the mysteries of his past. Mr. Winters was difficult at first. He barely spoke, merely grunting responses to my questions about his comfort or medications. He spent his days staring out the large bay window of his study, watching the changing seasons pass by like ghosts. But as months went by, small cracks appeared in his hardened exterior. One evening, while helping him to bed, I noticed a photograph on his nightstand, a black and white image of a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Is this your sister?" I asked, handing him his evening pills. His weathered hands trembled as he took the frame. "Elizabeth," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion, "my little Lizzie." That night marked a turning point. Mr. Winters began to speak more, sharing fragments of his life story during our quiet evenings together. He told me about growing up wealthy during the Depression, about building his father's modest manufacturing company into an empire, about the heavy weight of loneliness that came with success. But most often, he spoke of Elizabeth. "She was the kindest soul you'd ever meet," he said one rainy afternoon. "While I was counting dollars, she was counting the lives she touched, worked at homeless shelters, soup kitchens. Our parents couldn't understand why someone born into privilege would choose to live so modestly. What happened to her?" I finally asked after nearly a year of caring for him. His eyes clouded over. We argued, terribly, about money, about how she was wasting her potential, as our father would say. I was just like him, obsessed with status and wealth. I said things. He paused, swallowing hard. Horrible things. The next day she was gone. No note, no goodbye. She just vanished. Did you look for her?" "For years," he nodded slowly. "Hired private investigators, offered rewards. Nothing. It's been 50 years now. She'd be 75. His voice trailed off as he retreated back into silence. As Mr. Winters' health declined, our conversations grew more profound. He spoke of regrets, of lessons learned too late, of the emptiness of his massive fortune with no one to share it with. "What good is all this?" he asked me one night, gesturing weakly around his opulent bedroom. "I traded what mattered for things that don't, and now it's too late." I didn't know what to say, so I simply held his hand until he drifted off to sleep. On a cold December morning, Mr. Winters passed away peacefully in his sleep. Despite having cared for many patients throughout my nursing career, his death affected me deeply. For 2 years, I had been his only consistent human connection, his caretaker, his confidant, and perhaps, in some small way, his friend. 3 days after the funeral, a sparse affair attended only by Mr. Donovan, myself, and a handful of business associates, I received a call from the attorney. "Mr. Winters' will is to be read tomorrow at 2 p.m., he informed me. "Your presence is requested." I was surprised. "Me? Why would he want me there?" "He specifically mentioned you, James. Please be at my office tomorrow." The next day, I arrived at Donovan and Associates, an imposing law firm housed in a historic brownstone in downtown Boston. Mr. Donovan ushered me into a conference room where two other men in expensive suits, executives from Mr. Winter's company, were already seated. "Gentlemen," Mr. Donovan began formally, "we are here for the reading of Harold Winter's last will and testament." The will addressed company matters first, with shares and positions being distributed to key executives. Then came the revelation that stunned everyone in the room. As to my personal estate, including my primary residence, all investment accounts, art collections and personal property, valued at approximately $78 million. Mr. Donovan read, his voice steady. "I leave in its entirety to my sister, Elizabeth Ann Winters, should she be located within 1 year of my death." The executives exchanged confused glances. One of them leaned forward. "Elizabeth Winters? But she's been missing for decades. She's likely dead." "Mr. Winters anticipated that response," Mr. Donovan replied. "The will continues. I have never given up hope that my sister is alive. I have established a trust to continue the search for her whereabouts. If Elizabeth cannot be found within 1 year, or if proof of her death is established, my entire personal estate shall be divided, with half going to the Boston Children's Hospital and half to the Greater Boston Food Bank, the causes my sister championed in her youth." The executives nodded, seemingly satisfied with this contingency. But Mr. Donovan wasn't finished. "There is one more provision," he continued. "To James Morgan, who provided care and companionship during my final years, I leave the sum of $100,000 as a token of my appreciation for his kindness." I sat in stunned silence. It was a generous gift, enough to pay off my student loans and then some, but my mind was stuck on Elizabeth, the mysterious sister whose disappearance had shaped the last half-century of Mr. Winter's life. As the meeting concluded, Mr. Donovan asked me to stay behind. Once we were alone, he retrieved a manila envelope from his briefcase. "Harold left this for you as well," he said, sliding it across the table. "He asked that I give it to you privately." Inside the envelope was a letter and a photograph, the same black and white image that had sat on Mr. Winter's nightstand. I unfolded the letter with trembling hands. "Dear James, if you're reading this, I've finally found peace. During our time together, you showed me more compassion than I deserved. You listened to an old man's regrets without judgment, and for that, I am grateful. My greatest regret remains the rift between my sister and me. For 50 years, I've searched for her, hoping for a chance to make amends. Now, that responsibility falls to others. The photograph enclosed is the last image I have of Elizabeth, taken in 1973. She would be in her mid-70s now, if she's still alive. I know it's unlikely after all this time, but I must hold on to hope. Thank you for your kindness, James. In a life filled with wealth but little warmth, you brought humanity to my final days. Sincerely, Harold Winters." I stared at the photograph, studying the young woman's features. She couldn't have been more than 25 when it was taken. "We'll be engaging a new team of investigators," Mr. Donovan said, breaking my contemplation. "But after 50 years... He let the implication hang in the air. I nodded, sliding the photograph back into the envelope. "I understand. It's a long shot." As I left the law firm, a strange feeling settled over me. The image of Elizabeth Winters kept flashing in my mind. There was something hauntingly familiar about her face, though I couldn't place why. 2 days later, I was visiting my mother at Pine Grove Nursing Home, where she had lived since her dementia diagnosis 3 years prior. Our visits followed a familiar pattern. I would bring fresh flowers, tell her about my week, and show her photographs of my life, even though she rarely recognized me anymore. "Who are you again, young man?" she asked, as she did almost every visit. "I'm James, Mom, your son." I squeezed her hand gently. She smiled vaguely, then pointed to the vase of daisies I'd brought. Those are my favorites. Elizabeth always brings me daisies. I froze. Elizabeth? Who's Elizabeth, Mom? My dear friend Elizabeth, she replied with unusual clarity. She volunteers here, reads to us, brings us treats. Such a kind soul. My heart began to race. Mom, how old is Elizabeth? She furrowed her brow. Oh, she's older like me. 70-something, I'd say. Grey hair now, but still has those kind eyes. With shaking hands, I pulled the envelope from my jacket pocket and showed her the photograph. Is this Elizabeth, Mom? The one who volunteers here? My mother's eyes lit up with recognition. Yes, that's her when she was young. Where did you get this? The room seemed to spin around me. Could it possibly be her? After all these years? When does she volunteer, Mom? When will she be here next? Tuesdays and Thursdays, my mother replied, suddenly lucid. She reads poetry in the sunroom at 3. Today was Tuesday. I glanced at my watch. 2:45 p.m. Mom, I need to step out for a bit. I'll be right back. I hurried to the sunroom at the end of the corridor, my mind racing with possibilities. As I approached, I heard a gentle voice reading aloud. Rounding the corner, I saw her, an elderly woman with silver hair styled in a neat bob, sitting in a chair surrounded by residents. Though decades had passed since the photograph was taken, there was no mistaking those kind eyes, that gentle smile. Elizabeth Winters was alive, and she had been within reach all along. I waited until she finished reading, watching as she chatted warmly with each resident. When the group dispersed, I approached her cautiously. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely steady. "Are you Elizabeth?" She turned, smiling warmly. "Yes, I am. Do I know you?" "No, ma'am, but I knew your brother, Harold." The smile vanished from her face. She stood perfectly still, searching my eyes as if looking for a trick. "Harold? You knew my brother?" "I was his nurse for the last 2 years of his life," I explained gently. "He passed away recently." Elizabeth sank slowly into a nearby chair, her hand clutching her chest. "Harold is gone?" Her voice was barely a whisper. I nodded, taking the seat beside her. "I'm very sorry. He spoke of you often." "He did." Tears welled in her eyes. "After all these years?" "Every day," I confirmed. "Finding you was his greatest wish." She stared out the window, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I never thought he'd even try. We were so different. He valued wealth and status. I valued connection and community. When I told him I was giving my inheritance to charity, he was furious, said I was naive, foolish, that I'd regret throwing away security." "What happened after you left?" I asked gently. She wiped her tears with a tissue. "I started over. Changed my name to Elizabeth Bennet, my favorite character from literature. Worked as a teacher in Vermont, then New Hampshire, eventually settling back in Massachusetts. Never married, devoted my life to service instead. I've volunteered here at Pine Grove for 15 years now." "Did you ever think about contacting him?" She nodded sadly. "Many times. But pride is a powerful thing, and decades pass so quickly. After a while, it seemed too late to bridge such an old wound." I reached into my pocket and withdrew the envelope. "Harold left something for you," I said, handing her the letter. As Elizabeth read her brother's words, silent tears streamed down her face. When she finished, she carefully folded the letter and held it against her heart. "He changed," I told her. "In the end, he understood what truly mattered wasn't wealth or status. He regretted the man he had been." She nodded, grief and regret etched on her face. "And now it's too late to tell him I forgave him long ago. Dawkins, there's something else you should know," I said carefully. "Harold left his entire fortune to you, $78 million. Elizabeth's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? That's impossible." It's true. His attorney has been searching for you. If you weren't found within a year, the money would go to the Children's Hospital and Food Bank." She sat in stunned silence, processing this information. Finally, a small smile formed on her lips. "The Children's Hospital and Food Bank," she repeated softly. "He remembered, after all these years, he remembered what mattered to me." "What will you do?" I asked. Elizabeth straightened her shoulders, sudden determination replacing shock. "First, I'll contact Mr. Donovan. Then I'll honor both my brother's legacy and my own values. The money can do tremendous good, expand programs at the hospital, modernize the food bank, create scholarships for underprivileged youth." She reached out and squeezed my hand. "Thank you, James, not just for finding me, but for being there for Harold when I couldn't be, for showing him kindness in his final days." As I walked back to my mother's room, a profound sense of peace washed over me. Through a remarkable coincidence, or perhaps something more meaningful, I had been the bridge between a brother and sister separated by half a century of silence. Two lives that had diverged so dramatically had somehow, through me, found their way back to each other. In the end, Mr. Winters got his wish. He found his sister after all, through the unexpected connection of a nurse who simply paid attention to the details of people's lives and recognized the extraordinary in what appeared ordinary. And Elizabeth would ensure that her brother's fortune, accumulated through decades of business success, would finally serve the purposes she had championed all along, helping others, fostering community, and making the world a little kinder. Sometimes, even after 50 years, it's not too late for redemption. It's never too late for a story to find its proper ending. 3 months later, I sat in the back row of a packed auditorium at Boston Children's Hospital. The room buzzed with excitement as Elizabeth took the stage to unveil the Harold and Elizabeth Winters Foundation. "My brother and I walked different paths for most of our lives," she began, her voice strong despite her age. "Harold built wealth, while I sought to build community. We both believed we were right." She smiled gently. "It took 50 years and one remarkable nurse for us to learn we were both right in our own ways." I shifted uncomfortably as several heads turned in my direction. Since reuniting Elizabeth with her brother's legacy, I'd become something of a local celebrity. The Boston Globe had run a front-page story about the nurse who solved the million-dollar mystery. Mr. Donovan had called it a one-in-a-million coincidence that I had been both Harold's nurse and a regular visitor to the facility where Elizabeth volunteered. But I knew it wasn't just coincidence. It was about paying attention, truly seeing people when so many go unnoticed. Elizabeth continued her speech, outlining the Foundation's three-pronged mission: medical care for underserved children, food security initiatives, and elder care programs. The Foundation would distribute nearly all of Harold's fortune over the next decade, making targeted investments in programs with measurable impacts. After the ceremony, Elizabeth found me near the refreshment table. "James, there you are." She embraced me warmly. "I have something for you." She handed me a business card. I read it with confusion. "James Morgan, Executive Director, Elder Connection Program." "What is this?" I asked. "Your next job, if you want it," she said. "The Foundation is launching a program to pair nursing students with elderly residents who lack family connections. Who better to lead it than the man who showed me the power of such connections?" I stared at the card, speechless. The position offered triple my nursing salary, with the chance to effect systemic change rather than caring for one patient at a time. "I don't have the qualifications," I protested weakly. Elizabeth waved away my concerns. "You have something better than qualifications. You have heart, James. You see people, truly see them." Before I could respond, we were interrupted by Mr. Donovan, who approached with a stern-looking woman in a crisp business suit. "Elizabeth, this is Margaret Chen from the State Attorney General's office. She has some concerns about the foundation." Ms. Chen didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Ms. Winters, while your story is certainly touching, we have significant questions about your sudden appearance after 50 years. Coincidentally, after your brother's death left a substantial fortune." Elizabeth's face remained calm, but I felt anger rising in my chest. "Are you implying fraud?" I asked sharply. "We're conducting due diligence," Ms. Chen replied coolly. "It's rather convenient that a missing heir appears precisely when needed, don't you think? Especially one who stands to control millions in charitable funds." Mr. Donovan cleared his throat. "We've provided DNA verification, Ms. Chen. Elizabeth is unquestionably Harold's sister." "DNA confirms relation, not identity," she countered. "We need more substantial proof that this woman is indeed the Elizabeth Winters named in Harold's will, not someone using her identity." Elizabeth placed a gentle hand on my arm as I began to protest. "It's all right, James. Ms. Chen is doing her job." She turned to face the investigator. "I welcome your inquiry. The Foundation's work is too important to be undermined by any cloud of suspicion." As Ms. Chen walked away, Elizabeth sighed. "I should have expected this. When there's money involved, nothing is ever simple." "This is ridiculous," I muttered. "Anyone who speaks with you for 5 minutes would know you're exactly who you say you are." "Perhaps," she smiled sadly, "but the world runs on evidence, not intuition. Even Harold searched for me, using facts and investigators, not by feeling his way to me." She squeezed my hand. "Don't worry. Truth has a way of making itself known." I wasn't so sure. As I drove home that evening, I worried that the investigation could drag on for months, delaying the Foundation's work and tarnishing Elizabeth's reputation. There had to be a way to prove conclusively that she was Harold's long-lost sister. That's when I remembered something Mr. Winters had mentioned during one of our late-night conversations. Something about a childhood secret only he and Elizabeth had shared. If I could find evidence of that secret, it might help confirm Elizabeth's identity beyond any doubt. The next morning, I made a decision. I would return to the Winters mansion one last time. The mansion stood silent and empty as Mr. Donovan unlocked the front door. "I don't know what you expect to find," he said skeptically. "The investigators were quite thorough." "I'm looking for something specific," I explained, heading straight for Mr. Winters' study. "Something he mentioned once about a childhood hiding place." Mr. Winters had told me how he and Elizabeth had hollowed out a space behind the bookshelf in their father's study, a secret spot where they hid treasures and passed notes to each other as children. The current study had been rebuilt after a fire in the 1980s, but Mr. Winters had recreated that hiding spot as a sentimental reminder of his sister. I ran my fingers along the ornate bookshelf, searching for the mechanism he had described. After several minutes, I felt a slight depression in the woodwork. I pressed it, and a small panel slid open, revealing a dusty compartment. Inside lay a metal box, its once shiny surface now tarnished with age. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. "What is that?" Mr. Donovan asked, leaning forward. I opened the box carefully. Inside were childhood treasures. Baseball cards, marbles, a small pocket knife, but most importantly there was a stack of yellowed notes, messages passed between Harold and Elizabeth decades ago. I lifted them gently, reading the childish handwriting. "Dear Harold, I borrowed your baseball glove. Don't be mad. Love, Lizzie. Lizzie, I'm not sharing my comic books anymore, unless you bring cookies. Harold." And then, at the bottom of the stack, a more recent note in Harold's shaky handwriting. "Lizzie, if you ever find this, know that I'm sorry. The hiding place is still here, waiting for you to come home. I've kept your treasures safe. Your half of the summer camp earnings is in the old spot. I never spent it. It's still yours. Harold. Attached to the note was a small key. Mr. Donovan's eyes widened. That looks like a safe deposit box key. Summer camp earnings, I murmured, remembering another story Mr. Winters had told. They worked at a camp one summer and saved for a trip to Europe. Harold went alone after their fight. 2 days later, Elizabeth, Mr. Donovan, Miss Chen and I stood in a bank vault room as the manager brought out a safe deposit box untouched for decades. The key fit perfectly. Inside was exactly $342.18, Elizabeth's half of their summer earnings, along with a handwritten IOU from Harold, dated July 1973. Ms. Chen examined the evidence, her skepticism finally cracking. These items were secured before anyone knew Harold's fortune would be left to Elizabeth. There would be no reason to plant this evidence. And the handwriting on these childhood notes matches samples we have from Elizabeth's school records, Mr. Donovan added. Elizabeth wasn't looking at them. She was holding the childish notes, tears streaming down her face. He kept everything, she whispered. All these years. 1 week later, the investigation was formally closed. The Harold and Elizabeth Winters Foundation was cleared to begin its work, with Elizabeth at the helm and me as director of the Elder Connection program. On my first day, Elizabeth called me into her office. She had decorated it simply, no expensive artwork or pretentious furniture, just comfortable chairs and framed photos. On her desk sat the metal box from the hiding place. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said, gesturing for me to sit, "not just for clearing my name, but for everything. You didn't just reunite me with Harold's legacy, you gave me back my brother." "I was just doing my job," I said, embarrassed by her gratitude. Elizabeth shook her head firmly. "No, James, most people do their jobs. You did something more. You truly saw the people in your care. You listened when Harold spoke of his sister. You recognized me from a 50-year-old photograph. You remembered details that even investigators missed." She leaned forward. "That's why the Elder Connection program is so important. We're not just matching nursing students with lonely seniors. We're teaching them to see people as you do." As I left her office, I thought about the strange path that had led me here. I had taken a job as a private nurse simply because it paid better than hospital work. I never imagined it would lead to reuniting long-lost siblings, uncovering a fortune, or starting a foundation. But that's the thing about truly seeing people. Sometimes, when you look closely enough at one life, you end up changing countless others, including your own.